All right, welcome back to Sports Now, the VistaNow Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Hunter Worley, joined today by Jacob Riffle. And Jacob, we're going to be talking about football today, so...
Absolutely. I figured let's kick it off with some injury reports. Mountain Vista is now halfway through their season. And so, obviously, their biggest injury of note right now, Campbell Lancaster is out a minimum of 1 more week. He's expected back in a couple, but it could be as much as 3 weeks. When I spoke to him yesterday, he said that he almost completely tore his subscapularis?
Subscapularis.
Yes. Subscapularis, that's it. The tendon in his rotator cuff. What happened was during the Thunder Ridge game, he was playing and he threw a pass and a guy came up right underneath him with their helmet and sacked him. And as he released it, the guy got him right underneath the shoulder and it tore then. And so he's obviously out. He hopes to be back by Chaparral or Pomona.
That is a big loss for Mountain Vista, but I think that their backup, Caden Wetzel, has done a good job so far at coming back and acting as the backup and, accepting his role, understanding what Mountain Vista needs out of him, and doing a great job. He played great against Arapahoe, had a couple touchdowns, and led Mountain Vista to a win. So Caden's been doing a great job filling in, but having Campbell out has definitely hurt Mountain Vista.
Yeah, and like you're saying, I think if you have to have a backup quarterback in, it's not a bad deal to have Wetzel in. Because his stats, he has 66 passing attempts. He averages a touchdown per game passing. He has a 65% completion rate and a 2% interception rate, which are not bad stats for a high school quarterback, especially a backup one. And then moving along the list, Killian Ward has potential to come back later in the last 2 games. I know initially we were looking at him being out the entire season. He messed up his knee, and it looked like a season-ending injury alongside Trevor Jasper, who is out for the season. However, Killian has potential to come back.
That's good. I think Killian's also a big part of this Mountain Vista team. He's not only a leader on the field, but off the field in practice, helps the team, knows what he's doing, is a very smart football player. So I think if they do have the ability to get him back, that would help them a lot as a team.
Absolutely. And then also another injury of note, or a couple, is Bryce Williams. He was their corner. He had some great plays in the Thunder Ridge game, such as batting down the 2-point conversion. However, he has questionable status, so he's week to week. He has a mystery injury in his right leg right now. And considering that they face off against Hinckley this week, they'll probably be resting him in favor of some lower depth guys to kind of give him some rest and make sure that he's good to go for the following game.
I agree. I think if Trainer Joe even has anything to say about it, especially, he'll talk to Coach Cash, and the fact that they are playing Hinckley, it's not as much of a pressure situation. They don't want to force him to continue to play if he has time to rest, and they can't have him rest. So I believe that Bryce will be sitting out this week, but don't be too alarmed. I think he should be back in hopefully 2 weeks.
Absolutely. And then our last injury of note, Thomas Hall dislocated his kneecap. He's expected back in 2 weeks. He's their kicker. Brady Stevens has been filling in fine. He's a little shaky on some of the PATs and field goals. This is kind of where Thomas Hall specializes. However, Brady Stevens typically does most of the kickoffs. And so Mountain Vista's making it, but expect to see, maybe a 3-point average rise when he comes back.
I think it was a big loss missing Thomas because he is the place kicker who makes a lot of the PATs. And one big moment that's kind of notable that I noticed that really we were missing Thomas was when in the Thunder Ridge game it was kind of back and forth, and then Mountain Vista scored their 5th touchdown, and then the PAT was missed, giving Thunder Ridge that 1-point lead going into halftime, which I believe was a big momentum swing for Thunder Ridge. And then they kind of ran away with that game. So missing Thomas has been a very big loss for Mountain Vista.
Absolutely. And if it did anything, it was just mentality when they missed that field goal. So now let's kind of move on. Let's see. I think defense is next, right?
I do have defense covered here. So Mountain Vista's defense has 247 tackles on the season. They average 49.4 tackles per game. They only have 5 tackles for a loss this season, however, so they're not doing a great job at pushing in and getting stops in the backfield for losses. They have 199 total solo tackles, so most of the time Mountain Vista is getting help on their tackles. They do run a 3-3-5, so they have 3 down linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. I talked to a couple of the defensive backs and even some linemen, and the defensive backs say and agree with the offensive linemen that it is tough for the offensive linemen to get through and put as much pressure as they would like to put on quarterbacks because they have that 3-3-5, so they don't have a lot of numbers. And it's also very hard for Mountain Vista to fill in the gaps because as a defensive linemen, if you're rushing, you have to trust that your linebackers are going to fill in those gaps that you're not covering. So they are left open a majority of the time, and that does allow for big gains. So that's what's been hurting them on defense, but I think if they can make that adjustment and find out how to fill in those gaps so they're not left open as much, I think that'll definitely help them for the rest of the season.
Right, and one of the areas that Mountain Vista has struggled, especially on defense, is the run game and stopping that. So, I don't know, do you think the new defensive front has a role to play in that?
I definitely do. I also think that, there's just not much you can do when you don't have a lot of numbers and not a lot of size. The Mountain Vista defense is relatively small. They have their defensive backs, which are all small guys, but they believe they make up for that in their speed. I talked to Bryce Williams yesterday, and he says that he thinks that they make up for that in their speed, but when you have bigger guys, they're always going to be able to run you over, so they're not able to get through blocks as well, which is partially why they struggle with the run game.
Right, makes sense. Let's see, moving on. I know we also do well in the pass game, kind of because our corners are fast.
Yeah.
How do you feel about our passing defense this year?
Well, like Bryce said yesterday, he thinks that if they continue to just be able to fill in the gaps in the run game, then they'll have to pass. And Mountain Vista's done a pretty good job at defending the pass this season, so I think if they keep that up and just continue to work hard in practice, I think the results will come.
Right, and we saw it against their Thunder Ridge game in Pomona. The running backs can run free against Mountain Vista for several yards, sometimes 20, 30-plus yard runs. Whereas the passing game, it's more likely than not that it'll be incomplete. So good job to the Mountain Vista corners there. Moving on, we're going to go...
I have one more thing to say about the defense. They do run what's called a pursuit to the football. They have 9 guys 5 yards away from the ball 90% of the time, or they call it a 9-5-90. So that's just reassuring the players that if they continue, I think, that trend, they'll be able to get pressure on the football, and they'll always be there. They're a very ball-hawking defense. Their secondary is their strength. So I think if they can just surround the football and defend the run game a little bit better, I think they'll have a good second half.
I think so too, and we'll have to see how that plays out against teams such as Chaparral and Pomona. Now on to the offensive side of the ball. Mountain Vista, just some general stats real fast. They're 2-3 overall. They're 0-2 at home, so they haven't won a home game yet, but they are 2-1 away. What do you think of this? Typically, teams are more successful at home than they are away.
Yeah, I think that's kind of strange, especially because we have the unit, the MV unit, which is always supporting our football team greatly. And one of those home games was the Thunder Ridge game.
Right.
So it was tough that we couldn't beat Thunder Ridge at home, but I think it just has to do with a lack of maybe focus or attention maybe. But I think that Mountain Vista is doing a pretty decent job. Right,
and part of it could be their schedule too. Their home games so far, they played Pooter and Thunder Ridge. Pooter was kind of a surprising loss, considering they beat them so badly last year. However, we had some personnel changes and they didn't. So that was part of the issue. And Thunder Ridge has historically won against Mountain Vista. And so we put up a good fight against them, and that was also the game that Campbell Lancaster got injured in.
Right.
So that created some issues. However, their away games that they've won, they beat Rangeview and Arapahoe especially is nothing to scoff at.
I definitely agree with you. Arapahoe's defense put a lot of pressure on Mountain Vista's offense, and Caden Wetzel did a great job at coming in that game because of the injured Campbell, and was able to just put pressure on the Arapahoe defense and ended up getting away with the win.
Absolutely, and it was close too. It was 24-21, so good job there to Caden Wetzel for keeping his head in the game, not getting too nervous. The only away game they've lost was against Regis. They lost 40-14. Kind of a game that has happened before in Mountain Vista history. Last year, Regis was our homecoming game, and I know we put up a good fight against them. So kind of some trending downward there against Regis, but nothing that isn't expected.
And Regis is one of the top 10 teams in the state. I think that they're definitely a competitor for the postseason, and Mountain Vista didn't play very well that game, but that's a tough team that they're facing. So, with the way Mountain Vista had been playing, I don't want to say that it wasn't a surprise, but the expectations were not very high for Mountain Vista that game.
Right. However, kind of the opposite side of the story here this week, they play against Hinckley, who is historically bad, probably shouldn't be in 5A. Hinckley last year went 0-10 the whole season and were shut out the majority of their games. This year they actually have a win against Thornton High School. However, Hinckley struggles in a lot of areas. Let's see, I think I have stats on it. Yeah. For 39 passing attempts for the season, they have a 44% completion rate and a 15% interception rate.
I think that with the fact that Mountain Vista's secondary has done very well, I think that those two things go hand in hand, and Mountain Vista will hopefully be able to get a lot of turnovers on the defensive side of the ball.
Right, absolutely. That should absolutely help out the defense. And also on the offense game, there were only 2 games where they didn't allow 50 points or more, and the minimum that they've lost with the point spread was 34 points.
That's a significant amount of points.
Right, that's almost 5 touchdowns that you're down. And so expect good things out of the Mountain Vista offense. If there's a week that they could have kind of a get-right game, it's against Hinckley, especially considering they face Chaparral and Pomona, Cherokee Trail, and Rock Canyon to finish out the season.
Not only does it help that they're playing Hinckley, but it is a home game, so looking to get on the win column for that first win at the on the home turf. So hopefully Mountain Vista's... I think the defense is going to make or break that game. I think that the offense will get the opportunities they need, but I think if the defense can really put a lot of pressure on not only the pass game, but I'm sure Hinckley knows that Mountain Vista is vulnerable to the run game. So I think if they shut the run game down and do what they've been doing with the pass game, I think the results will show.
Absolutely. And then also just some quick people who you should look to have a good night against Hinckley. Noah Hicks, he has the most carries and yards. He has 74 carries for 349 yards, so he averages about 4.75 yards per carry and 70 yards per game, and he has 3 touchdowns on the season. If there was a game that you could see some improvement from Hicks, it's probably this one. I would say his average carry or yards per carry would probably move up to around the 7 or 8 yard range after this game. And he'll be more of a speed back, whereas Whiteside is more of a bruiser. And then Tristan Smith, he is probably our best receiver, followed closely by Aaron Albertson. Smith has 28 receptions, 5.6 per game, so that's pretty good right there. He has 526 total yards for the season, so he averages 18.8 yards per catch. That's almost 20 yards per catch. That's definitely a first down if you're throwing it to Tristan Smith and he catches it. His longest was an 80-yard run, and he has 7 touchdowns on the season, which is about a third of Mountain Vista's touchdowns.
Tristan Smith is definitely a playmaker, and I think if Caden is able to find Tristan and is able to make plays, I think that Tristan will also be a big X factor for Mountain Vista's offense especially. But going along with Noah Hicks, I think that he needs to just stay patient with the run game, because it might not be there at first, but if you continue to grind out and continue to wear out that Hinckley defense, I think that if he puts that pressure on that defense, they'll be just fine.
Absolutely. And also Aaron Albertson, another wide receiver I mentioned, he has 26 receptions on the season. He averages 5.2 per game, so just shy of Tristan Smith's. He has 466 yards. He averages 17.9 yards per catch, and his longest is 90 yards, and he has 3 total touchdowns. So I would say that, if you were a fantasy owner and you had Tristan Smith in your high school,
I'd be starting him this week.
You would definitely be starting him, and then you would have Aaron Albertson. Kind of, if you're in a 10-team league or more, you would definitely want to have him because he definitely gets the yards, he gets the passing attempts and the catch, and he also gets touchdowns. Also, some guy that if we were playing high school fantasy, you might want to consider on your bench or in a flex, Cameron Williams. He has 15 receptions for 161 yards. He averages 3 receptions per game, but what makes him special is that he has 3 touchdowns. So he's averaging a touchdown per game, which is nothing, to kind of turn your nose at, especially when it's a young guy like a junior. Yeah.
I think one thing that makes Cameron a very good receiver and a very underrated receiver is not necessarily his speed, but his physicality and how he uses his hands. He has very big hands and is able to get around defenders and is very physical with defenders, has no problem going nose-to-nose with anybody, and that allows him to create space and get some opportunities to get some touchdown receptions.
Right. Mountain Vista obviously doesn't have tight ends. They haven't since very, very early in the school's history. However, for an H kind of position, Cameron Williams is perfect for that. And then to finish it out, the Mountain Vista quarterbacks, Campbell Lancaster is one of the top-rated quarterbacks at a QBR of 128.6. And Wetzel, obviously the backup, he only has a 101.5, but still, that's not a bad rating.
Yeah, Caden hasn't played that much, so that's kind of a hard thing to measure. But I think that missing Campbell, like we said earlier, is just very tough on Mountain Vista. He's been doing a great job. Had big shoes to fill with Judd Erickson leaving, graduating last year, and Campbell's done a very good job. He's helped the Mountain Vista offense be able to continue to generate points and stay in games, even when their defense might not be doing their job all the time, but I think that he's doing a phenomenal job at quarterback position. And hopefully Caden can continue his trend of filling in that role very well.
Absolutely. And as Mountain Vista has 272 receiving yards per game and 141 rushing yards per game and 21 total touchdowns for the season, they should put up a good fight against some of these teams, such as Chaparral.
I definitely agree. I think now we move on to special teams. We only have a few brief points to talk about with special teams. Mountain Vista only averages about 18.5 yards on punt returns, so I think a big thing against Hinckley is if they would be able to maybe return a couple punts for more than 20, 25 yards. I think that would put the offense in a good position with less pressure so that they would have to do less. They average about 26 yards on kickoff returns, so again, if they'd be able to get past that 30-yard line, that would really help the offense. There would be less pressure on them. They'd be able to really play with their playbook a little bit more, be able to experiment maybe a little bit, especially if they have a lead against Hinckley. And they average about 33 yards on punting, so the punting does need to be a little bit better because they're giving other offenses just easy field position, and it's not very difficult, and it's hard for the defense to get stops when the offense only has 40 or 50 yards to get to the end zone. So if they can continue to stretch out those points and put pressure and maybe get offenses deep back in their own territory, I think that would definitely help the Mountain Vista defense.
Right, and this gives Mountain Vista a good opportunity to kind of improve on their special teams. It's kind of a focal point at Mountain Vista, their special teams. Typically, Mountain Vista will return about 2 to 3 kickoffs per game for touchdowns, and a couple years ago that made the difference in the Thunder Ridge game. And so, as Mountain Vista progresses in their season, it'll be interesting to see if they can make improvements, specifically on kick return and punt return, as well as on the defensive side of the ball when they're punting the ball away. See if they can maybe get a little more yards out of Max Rupert, and make sure that they have everyone flying down to go get them.
I think that what Mountain Vista needs to do is not get ahead of themselves. I think that they're not playing terrible football. The Regis game may be an exception. They didn't play very well that game, but they're not playing very bad. I mean, they're playing pretty good football. I think they just need to clean it up a little bit. Just maybe make 1 or 2 plays are the difference usually in games.
Right.
Or like that missed extra point in the Thunder Ridge game. I think that was really the turning point. So if they can just do the little things well, I think that the wins will come. I think they just need to stay patient.
Right. The majority of their losses are not, astronomical. They're 1 or 2 scores. And so that's something that Mountain Vista can come back from. Maybe they're just not used to coming back from it.
Definitely, and their defense just needs to keep them in games like they have been doing pretty well. So I think if that defense, they do have a tough time with the run game like we talked about, but I think if they just keep Mountain Vista in the game, that the numbers will come and the touchdowns will come also.
Absolutely. Kind of moving on now, some schedule stuff. Mountain Vista has a tough end of their season. They kind of played some easier games early on against Pooter, Rangeview, Arapahoe, I guess. And now they face Hinckley, which is definitely the easiest game of their season. Following that, they play Chaparral, which is when they could be looking to have Campbell back at the earliest. Then they face Pomona, which he will most likely be back from at the latest. And then Cherokee Trail and Rock Canyon. So some league games coming up here. Some rivalries between Rock Canyon and Mountain Vista, and that being the pink game, as that's significant for both schools. They have kind of a interesting schedule coming up.
Definitely. I think Chaparral will be a big test because not only we talked about Campbell, you said potentially being back, but Bryce Williams also has the potential to come back because, like we said, he'll probably sit out against Hinckley because of that knee injury. But I think that not only the Rock Canyon game is big, but the Cherokee Trail game will be a very big test for this Mountain Vista team. Cherokee Trail is always a relatively good football team. They always put out a good group. And, I think if Mountain Vista can hang with them and play well and hopefully escape out of that game with a win. It doesn't have to be a pretty win, but a win's a win.
Right.
So I think if they can escape with a win, they'll be fine in a situation where they might even be looking at a potential low seed playoff spot.
Absolutely. And transitioning over to playoffs, Mountain Vista is currently 25th in the state. It used to be that the top 32 teams, 25th in 5A. They're 89th in the state overall. But it used to be that the top 32 5A teams would make it to the playoffs. Last year they changed it to the top 16, and Mountain Vista just barely avoided the playoffs last year. It came down to the final 2 games, and unfortunately they had some tough losses that they fought hard in, but it didn't go in their favor. So it'll be interesting to see this year, given their RPI and their strength of schedule, if Mountain Vista can pull out maybe a couple surprising wins against schools such as Cherokee Trail and Chaparral. That would definitely boost their rankings. If they beat those 2 teams, they're for sure looking at a playoff run.
Yeah, I think they maybe put themselves in a little bit of a tough situation in the first half of the season, but it's never too late to turn things around. And like you said, Hinckley's a great game to start that against them. I think after this Hinckley game, hopefully we're looking at a team that's going to sit at 500. And then with those last 4 games, I think Chaparral is a game that they could definitely win. They just need to play clean football. They just need to do the little things right, like I said. And then Pomona is going to be a very tough test for them on the road. But I think that Cherokee Trail and Rock Canyon are going to be the 2 games that it really comes down to. I think that they definitely have the ability to beat Rock Canyon. They had a last-second touchdown last year to beat Rock Canyon. That was a thrilling game. So Mountain Vista is riding on a win against them last year. Hopefully they can repeat that from last year, and hopefully against Cherokee Trail, which is, like I said, a tough team, hopefully they can just do the little things right and get that win. And I think if they get those 2 wins, they'll be in a good spot.
Right. And as we come to the close, just a couple quick things. I think if Mountain Vista plays their best, worst case scenario, they have a 5-5 season. I think they have potential to go 7-3, depending on how they do in the second half.
Definitely. I think it's just going to come down to the little things because, if you get ahead of yourself in any sport, if you get ahead of yourself, then, things start to fall apart. You're not executing what you should be. You're not playing the way that you can. But I think if they just do the little things right, that the results that they're hoping for will come.
Right. So some exciting stuff from Mountain Vista coming up. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon.